Can't believe the eavesdroppers are giving us shade already in the chat about stuff not working. Let us know in the chat if things are a bit janky tonight, because we're doing lots of different things. But anyway, hello, willkommen, bienvenue. Ben's taking this opportunity to try and sort his mic out.
Oh, well, why not?
Hey! Happy New Year. It's 2024. It's episode 311 of the Arms Inquisition. I'm Phil.
I'm Ben.
I'm Matt.
And we're very happy tonight to be joined by author, artist, and vagabond, all-around
owner,
gadfly,
yeah,
rake, Bob Osborne. How are you, Bob?
I'm very well, thank you. I like all those descriptions.
Dear, I don't know where they came
far
from.
Worse than that.
Oh, gosh. It's nice to see you. Happy New Year, Bob.
And the same to you, mate.
We were talking offline about...
although it's not actually the New Year. The New Year is April the 1st. But that's part of the Illuminati mind games to con the sheep into thinking it's New Year's on the 31st.
And we're off.
Right.
So they all go form a social ritual.
Yeah, go on, explain. What are you on about now?
Well, the New Year is actually on April the 1st. But they've changed the calendars to make it December the 31st so that people engage in a social ritual, which means going out, getting drunk, taking loads of drugs and things like that. So basically, people are just conforming to an artificial date, but we're not going to go into that.
Oh, go on. Why was it April the 1st? Was it something to do with harvest, springtime, something?
Yeah, I mean, that's the original pagan New Year, which goes back way back. And also Jesus' birth, of course, is not December the 31st either. It's actually September. But look, we're all living in the Matrix, so, we have to expect these things.
Yes. Yes, true. I was reading something. We were talking about it on last show about it was in the year 1666 or something. I think it was 21st of March, I think, in the UK was New Year's Day, somewhere around then. Yeah,
it normally used to coincide with the equinox or the change of seasons, and of course that's midsummer, and then that's the spring equinox. So effectively, going way back, the spring is the birth of the new year.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on from that, because we were talking offline before we decided to meet up tonight, and wondering sort of what to talk about for this show. And you were telling us that you'd been doing some new research on Aleister Crowley and thelema, and the kind of people he was hanging around with and who he influenced, people who subsequently became very notorious in their own right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of those stories when you couldn't make it up. How I came to go down this rabbit hole is that, as you know, I wrote a book called Zen or Spirit of Place last year, which hardback sold out, fortunately, and now it's gone to paperback. There was a lot of interest because I was looking at Crowley, the influence of communes, the influence of the Occult and Frieda von Richthofen, and people like Huxley, the Fabians. I then did a load of filmed interviews with Basis Project, which is run by Miles Johnson. Some of your people might know about that. They mainly are interested in UFO abductees, but they got interested in my research. And then I did a talk in Pusey about the Fabians, the transhumanists, the gender, and how Crowley was really one of the architects of the counterculture. So we actually went back afterwards, and I was chatting to all these UFO people. I'm not a ufologist, by the way. It's not my area of research, but I was telling them how Jack Parsons, who ran the Jet Propulsion Laboratory with was involved deeply with Hubbard, and then led to the creation of NASA, which was also involved the Nazi people that came over in Operation Paperclip. And I was telling them that Jack Parsons and Ron Hubbard were both controlled by Aleister Crowley. So they couldn't believe this. So I presented them with some of the research I've done. And of course, they want me to, do something on that. And when I've gone down this rabbit hole, it's quite incredible, how everything links up to my other research. So when I suggested that we can talk about a couple of things today, one of them was Nephilim, which relates to my great uncle, who was a giant from Nephilim bloodline. And now, of course, in Florida, you've got suspicions that the Nephilim have been seen. Also, we're getting ready for the Project Bluebeam, which is the fake alien invasion. So that agenda is going to roll out in the next year or two. But going back to Jack Parsons, it really piqued my interest because I came at it from the position where I was looking at Crowley, and one of the things I've researched is sex magic, which is quite a good thing to research, and that there's another story behind that. But if you can put the Jack Parsons on the screen.
Yep, here he is.
I don't know if you, I can't see it, but I don't know if any of your followers know about Jack Parsons, but he was one of the mavericks of the rocket science industry in California in the 30s. So he's born in 1914 in Pasadena. And he was kind of a prodigal genius, really, that when he was at school, he got expelled for blowing up the toilets. He was making rockets. He was fascinated by science fiction, especially people like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. So he really started experimenting with rockets, and he's also deeply involved with the occult. From an early age, he'd been following Crowley, and also reading a lot of Wells and things like that. So he was very interested in the UFO phenomena, in getting a man on the moon, and with some friends of his, they got access to the Guggenheim laboratories in Californian Institute of Technology. So even at an early age, he was identified by the military for really being a bit of a genius. So even as a student, he was having conversations with Werner von Braun, who was a German rocket scientist who then came over to America after the war with thousands of other scientists to be involved with Operation Paperclip. And it was really him that was responsible for, the Saturn V and putting the man on the moon. So apart from his involvement in experimenting with jet propulsion, Jack Parsons was heavily into the occult. And he, from an early age, was performing black magic rituals. He was involved in sex magic. And he got kind of identified by Crowley. If you can go on to the second slide.
Yep.
What happened, how I got into this research is that in my first book, I was researching communes that had spread from Europe during the First World War, and there was also one here at Zeno, which is where I'm living now. I'm actually living in the cottage where Lawrence, D.H. Lawrence.
There's a lot of information about that in your book, actually, isn't there?
Yeah, that was a massive area of research, and of course, that's also spread out into lots of other areas of research now. So that commune was really central to the idea that they're going to spread communes through the world, and also the commune or the counterculture is a great way of manipulating people. So, funny enough, I did a couple of things led on to me when I looked at some of your early people that you were talking to, including Mark Devlin, who's done great work on the counterculture. And he was mentioning about Marianne Faithfull and the Stones. Well, I can't really go into the Stones because I'm connected to them. But Marianne Faithfull's father, Robert Glynn Faithfull, worked for MI5, and it was him that interrogated Himmler at DB. So Marianne Faithfull grew up on a commune in the New Forest, and she wrote a book which is very good, and mentioned about sex and Schopenhauer. So really, her and Anita Pallenberg were kind of early honey traps, really. And the Stones, I know a lot about the Stones, but I'm not going to go into that now. But the Stones are all connected to Kenneth Anger, which comes into later when I start talking about Parsons. Now, the other strange bit of synchronicity was that I think we had a lady who talked about Gurdjieff, which piqued my attention because, again, going back to my research here, one of the women here was Catherine Mansfield, who was involved with Lawrence's friend Middleton Murray. So Lawrence was trying to do sex rituals here on the moors, and Catherine Mansfield was also highly promiscuous and a drug taker connected to Crowley. And she went to live in Gurdjieff's Institute for Harmonious Development, which is like...
Really?
effectively, it's looking for the fourth dimension. Now, the fourth dimension taps into a lot of the Kundalini sex magic research that these people have done. So the links between all these people are phenomenal. Now, when she went to work to live with Gurdjieff, who she became obsessed, she actually died there very young. She had gonorrhea. And the really weird thing is that at that time in 1922, Crowley also had an office in Fontainebleau, which was part of the O.T.O, which was this secret society that is very connected with what went on with in California in the 30s. And weirdly, there's some people who've done some digging into this, and I'm quite fascinated by the fact that Gurdjieff was actually not who we think he is. He was a British intelligence asset whose real name was Frederick Dottle, and he was working for British intelligence. He was born in the East End in Whitechapel. He had the ability to speak lots of languages. Then he became Gurdjieff, which led on to other people like Orage and people like that. Again, a big counterculture icon. And Gurdjieff was actually, at that time, probably controlled by Crowley. Now, this seems very fanciful, but when I later found out that Jack Parsons was and Ron Hubbard were also under the control of Aleister Crowley, it all started fitting in, really. And it's just another piece of that thing where you get a jigsaw puzzle, and the more pieces you put in, the more the bigger picture comes out.
Yeah, the easier it gets in some ways, the further you get along.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing about doing this in this research. And like I explained, I think, in our previous talk, I have a very weird brain in the sense that I can make connections that probably logical people wouldn't normally make. And that's part of being psychic, being a Romany gypsy, being a bit of a ducker and diver, and also using the analeptic process, which is a form of astral travel. So all this information floods into me. And on that second slide, you can see Jack Parsons there with his wife, Helen Northrup, and the other guy is Wilfred Smith. Now, I'm just going to make this brief because it's a very complicated story, but in 1912, Aleister Crowley was made head of the O.T.O. The O.T.O is the Ordo Templis Orientis, which was a secret society that was set up at the Ascona Commune, and it's based on the Bavarian Freemasonry, ancient Bavarian Freemasonry society. And Crowley took control of this society, which was quite a significant thing because this was spreading out throughout the world through a collection of secret societies. And he set up something called the Agape Lodge, which was an O.T.O society in Pasadena, in Southern California, just outside Los Angeles. And at that time, Jack Parsons became obsessed with Crowley, but this isn't just an isolated incident because this was happening in lots of other places as well. So Crowley's agent was a guy called Wilfred Smith, who I think is on that image. And Wilfred Smith ran the O.T.O in Vancouver and then was sent to run the O.T.O in Pasadena, Southern California, because a lot was happening in California at that time, including Aldous Huxley. A lot of other people were getting involved in the counterculture movement. So you could see that Jack Parsons had a double life. By day, he was a really up-and-coming rocket scientist who was employed by the government, was doing brilliant research. But at night time, he was leading this double life as an occultist, a black magician. And, the FBI started taking an interest in him. And he was performing some of these rites. And if you go to the third slide, that guy is a guy called Wilfred T. Smith. Now, he was Aleister Crowley's agent to run the Agape Lodge. And he kind of infiltrated into, or invited Jack Parsons into his occult society. Now, Jack Parsons, there was a lodge in Hollywood, ironically, that Crowley had set up or been there in 1916. Hollywood also became a big center for, as many people know, for black magic, Satanism, which goes on to this day. So people like Anton LaVey, the Church of Satan, Kenneth Anger, who figures significantly in this story, plus all the stuff about Polanski, Rosemary's Baby, all that stuff. is a development from what was going on with these secret societies that Crowley set up. So the guy Wilfred T. Smith was running this lodge in Pasadena under Crowley's instruction, and he infiltrated himself into Jack Parsons' life. So he was like a very charming Englishman, and Parsons fell under his power. So when he was doing black magic rituals with Parsons in Pasadena, he also had an affair with Parsons' wife, Helen Northrup, and actually had a child 2 years later. Yikes. So, you know, you can see how all the sex magic rituals, you know, it's always tinged with a lot of mind control and a lot of completely licentious behaviour, and of course elements of mistrust. You know, phenomenal. So if you go to the next image, you can see Jack Parsons. I mean, he was a geek, really. You know, he was a very brilliant chemist, but I think he probably wasn't the most streetwise person. So when he was a youth, he was influenced by a lot of pulp fiction, and his whole life seems to be one long film noir. You know, the circumstances of him becoming a famous rocket scientist, getting involved with Crowley, and then his incredible suspicious death, his involvement with the FBI, with Werner von Braun. You know, it's a Pulp Fiction movie. So he was looking at things like Darker Than You Think as a kid, and this was about a shamanic tribe who were descended from wolves who managed to defeat Homo sapiens, and they could only exist in the current world by shape-shifting into humans. So this is the kind of literature that Parsons was reading alongside his advanced quantum physics and his chemistry. So what fascinated me was that there's always like a really big link between black magic and advanced science. So if you look at things like, which is a whole different story, but the United Nations, of course, is based on black magic principles. It's based on Thelemic philosophy. You know, this link between higher intelligence and the military, you know, it's a very powerful one. And of course, the Romans and the Greeks believed that super intelligent, creative people could tap into or could tap into demons, or demons would tap into them in order for them to access information. So if you go to the next one,
well, it's Crowley in his military garb.
Crowley, yeah. I mean, this is all figures very significantly in the research I did about Zeno, because Zeno was there was a commune at Zeno that where people were there that were very influenced by Crowley's black magic rituals, his philosophy of thelema. So in 1912, he was inducted into being the head of the O.T.O, which is this secret society that really controlled Freemasonry. And effectively, the O.T.O is what we would now consider, you know, people talk about the Illuminati. So he was put in a position of power in 1912 by the German Theodor Reuss, who ran the O.T.O, and they would do black magic rituals. And part of the agenda was to create the new environment for the Aeon of Horus, you know, which was the age of chaos, to a certain, the age of Aquarius as well. So Crowley seemed to be everywhere, and the fact that Crowley was running a lodge in California that used both Hubbard and Parsons is just beyond coincidence, because, you know, Hubbard, of course, went on to do Scientology, and so he had this power, and he had lodges, and he had people running these lodges, and all these lodges used to pay him money as well. So quite apart from, you know, being someone who could decode Enochian magic and had the most incredible ability to summon demons and angels and really set up the whole mind control thing, you know, he was also eking out a living. So the next character, of course, is Ron Hubbard. Now, I think people know that there's a connection between Jack Parsons and Ron Hubbard, but
I mean, it's on Wikipedia.
Yeah, there's a lot of information. It's quite a sordid story. What happened is that Parsons and his wife Helen Northrup were engaged in a lot of sex magic rituals. So they were running a house in Pasadena, and Parsons had made money. So he bought this place in South Orange Grove, and he called it the Parsonage. And effectively, he was getting people there. He only was letting rooms to artists, to occultists. You know, he had a very dark side, and I think one of the books about Parsons is called The Dark Angel. So he had this house, and of course it was attracting the attention of the FBI because he was also working in he had security clearance to work in you know, top secret programs, you know, designing rockets.
So was he still running JPL at this point? Was he sort of working on his own, or at, at the university, California Institute of Technology? But he was he hadn't been rolled into any other organisations yet. He was just sort of quite independent in that way. Really,
they created JPL was Jet Propulsion Laboratories, and that was really the embryo for NASA. And they decided that Parsons, and he had another guy called Ed Foreman, there was a group of them, and they were called the Suicide Squad, because they'd create these rockets, and of course, often things would go wrong. So they gave him access to the laboratories in the Guggenheim, and they kept an eye on him. And he was obviously a loose cannon. But at that time, Jet Propulsion Laboratory was also jokingly called Jack Parsons' lab, because he was the main man. You know, he was one of those geniuses that was really way ahead of his time. So when he got involved with running the parsonage, they kept an eye on him, but they were worried because him being so young, and he was taking all the drugs known to man. He was taking peyote and magic mushrooms, and you know, they were in gold. Him and Helen Northrop were both under the followers of Crowley's Thelemic religion, which involved a lot of sex magic, and the sex magic was a way of bringing in entities from the outside. So it ties into the UFO phenomenon, really. So they were experimenting with O.T.O, 8, 9, 10, 11 sex magic, and then of course Wilfred Smith bedded Parsons' wife. Now, Crowley wasn't happy with that, because Crowley, you know, was running this thing, and Crowley was a control freak, so he liked to have all these lodges. You know, he had a different vision of Jack Parsons. He wanted Jack Parsons to be his replacement. You know, lots of people became Crowley's replacements. Also, people like Timothy Leary, Kenneth Anger, all thought they were following in Crowley's footsteps. So he was grooming Parsons to be the leader of the O.T.O in California, in the Agape Lodge, which also attracted people like Aldous Huxley and a lot of other people there. So he was, when Hubbard ran off with Parsons' wife, Parsons was also shagging her sister, Helen's sister, Sarah Betty Northrop, and she was, I think, 17. And when Helen Northrop was away, Betty started wearing her sister's clothes and declared herself as Parsons' new wife. So you can imagine, like, there's a lot of drug taking, and it was a very promiscuous environment. And the FBI, you know, had reports that they investigated where a 16-year-old boy was sodomized, a pregnant woman had run through a fire 9 times. You know, there was a lot of rituals that were rituals based on Crowley's sex magic, which I've also got personal experience of. So the FBI were constantly monitoring them, and their concern was that at that time, Parsons also had, they think he had communist tendencies. So anyone at that time who was a bohemian, of course, fell under suspicion. And the FBI file on Parsons, you know, which at that time was run by Hoover, Edgar Hoover, was like hundreds of pages long. So they're constantly monitoring him. So it was all getting out of hand. And then when Hubbard came in, Hubbard had claimed to have known about Crowley before, although there's many people, including Crowley, who think he was just a chancer. You know, he was a charming con man, and of course went on to make millions with his Scientology. But he did have a talent for mind controlling people, and certainly Parsons came under his control, as did Parsons' wife. So if you go on to the next article, that's
We got a picture of Sarah Northrop Hubbard.
So after Parsons got off with his first wife's sister, Sarah, his first wife had gone off with Wilfred Smith, and then actually developed a long relationship with him, so that did endure. But then Sarah was a very slippery character, and she fell for the charms of Ron Hubbard. So Ron Hubbard was bedding Sarah Northrop, Parsons' girlfriend at the time. Parsons was also bisexual, so this parsonage, was just basically one big extended drug taking commune, really. And the Agape Lodge, this is where the Agape Lodge was based. So although Crowley had set this up to a certain extent, all the rituals they were doing, it had become completely decadent. Crowley's idea of these rituals had a very different vision of what Hubbard and Parsons and the entourage of drug addicts and bohemians were all doing. Of course, it was attracting a lot of attention as well. So before I go into the sex ritual stuff, after the Babylon workings, which we'll talk about in a minute, Hubbard and Sarah Northrop set up a business where they were buying yachts. They were using Parsons' money. So Hubbard clearly was a con man. And much later, there was a story that he was put in by the FBI in order to monitor this lodge. But I think that's just a bit of a front, really. So they set up a business where they were buying yachts with Parsons' money, and then they absconded. And of course, Crowley found out about all of this and told Parsons to get it all together and sort it out. He mistrusted Sarah Northrop. He thought she was a vampire. So at that time, Parsons, both of his wife and his sister had gone off with firstly Wilfred Smith and then Ron Hubbard. So he was in a kind of a bit of a fragile state. So despite that, he was to a certain extent under the control of Ron Hubbard, and he decided to carry on performing his sex rituals, which became the Babylon working, and the sex ritual was the O.T.O sex ritual number 8, which was basically masturbation, he used Ron Hubbard as his scribe. I'm not going to go into graphic detail because I don't know
go on.
What your viewers. I can, but let's just say there's a lot of
there's no digestive biscuits involved, is there?
A lot of dressing up involved,
okay.
And a lot of sacrifice, and they had an altar in their house, and Parsons had a big picture of Crowley on the wall, and they were involved in various sex rituals. And one of the early sex rituals they were performing, which is in order to the Babylon working. Now the sex ritual called the Babylon working was in order to bring forth what's called a moonchild, or an entity, or open a portal for extra, ETs to come in. So it's all connected to UFO, to Crowley's sex rituals about the Eon of Horus and Babylon. So they were doing these sex rituals, and Hubbard absconded. So at that time, there's also links to John Dee and Edward Kelly. Now, I think probably and some of your people will know who John Dee and Edward Kelly were. John Dee was Queen Elizabeth's magician. He was an astronomer, a mathematician, very brilliant man. And he had Edward Kelly, who was his squire. So Edward Kelly was this Irish psychic. So they were employed by the court at that time in Elizabethan times. Effectively that was the beginning of the military intelligence, and the first James Bond type was a guy called Sir Francis Walsingham. So it was common at that time to employ magicians, employ astrologers, because they were much more in touch with the mystic sciences, the black magic, and all of the stuff that came down through the Rosicrucians, the Knights Templars. It was much more. It hadn't been hidden and kept underground as it is now. So they were using Enochian magic, which was the magic that John Dee had encoded, in order to use angelic language to bring in entities. So they were dabbling with this. And the interesting thing is that Edward Kelly was a very dark character. He would dig up bodies. He was into necrophilia. He was kind of an early Jimmy Savile, really. And so he also ran off with John Dee's wife and stole all his money. This is in the 16th century. And now you've got 1946. Frank Parsons and Ron Hubbard are reenacting this Enochian magic that using the Enochian keys and the Enochian tablets to summon in entities or demons or angels, whatever you want to call them. And of course, this was done under the auspices of Crowley, because they were taking advice from Crowley, because Crowley was one of the few people that could decode the Enochian tablets and access the codes and the gematria and the language. So almost it's really weird in the sense that the same pattern happened. Parsons and Hubbard ran off with Parsons' wife and then absconded with all his money. So another coincidence. But when Crowley found out about this, he was absolutely livid, because he thought these people really didn't know what they were doing. If you go to the next photo, what happened is that Parsons...
That's another picture of Sarah Northrup, I think.
No,
smoking a fag.
That's a woman called Marjorie Cameron, who is a very interesting person who I've done a lot of research into. She looks a bit like Sarah Northrup, but it's actually not. Because the thing about Crowley's, which rubbed off from Parsons, he had this vision of the Scarlet Woman or the Whore of Babylon. And they all tended to be, witches, really, a bit, So Marjorie Cameron entered into the scene. Parsons was doing a ritual in the Mojave Desert with Hubbard, where Hubbard was scribing the voices that were coming through. Basically involved with Parsons doing a lot of masturbation, a lot of holding the energy from masturbation, trying to summon entities. And this really wasn't working very well. So Parsons decided he needed a muse, and a lot of these. Crowley worked through muses, and so did people that I've worked through muses, and Robert Graves, who I work with, had this concept of the muse, and it's a very old concept that women can represent, can lead you into areas where you wouldn't normally access information. So part of the sex magic was that Parsons needed a. So they're in the Mojave Desert. He's masturbating away. Ron Hubbard's, writing down all the voices, detailing it all in detail, which was written later in books. And then suddenly, Parsons seemed to have a moment of illumination, and he said that we've summoned the Whore of Babylon, which was one of the essences of this sex ritual. So they went back to the parsonage, and at that very same time, this woman Marjorie Cameron was knocking on their door. So she, if you see photographs of her, she fitted the description of the Whore of Babylon. She had red hair. She was 24, I think. A very disturbed woman, a witch who used to drive around LA in a hearse. She actually became a very fine artist, but as a child, she was very promiscuous. Her mother performed an abortion on her when she was a teenager, clearly very unstable. And of course, she was also a follower of Crowley's sex rituals. So she found out about what was going on in the parsonage, and then wanted to be part of the scene. So she turned up. And then when Parsons saw her, he immediately identified her as the Whore of Babylon, who he'd been trying to summon in the Mojave Desert. So within a few months, they were married. She became Parsons' main muse. She was a very important part of that Babylon working, and also, as I might go into if we get time, later in her life, she became a very important part of the South Californian counterculture. So if you can see below here, she was also an artist who believed that she could astral travel, and she could. She was obsessed with bringing in the apocalypse, and she did a painting here of Jack Parsons, and you can see there that there's lots of the occult symbology. Jack Parsons' name in the Agape Lodge was Phoenix, and of course Phoenix goes back to Phoenicia, and the Montauk is all very much part of the scene. So you can see he's got the phoenix wings, and he's got the hands of Pan. So it all goes back to a lot of this Egyptian occultism and black magic that is based on Baphomet worship.
And he's cut his toenails as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, so that's the kind of doing. She actually became a very fine artist, and
after this,
just below that,
just below that. Oh my gosh, this egghead thing.
That is the first grey that has ever been depicted,
and that's Margaret. Was it who painted it?
Aleister Crowley.
A Crowley. Oh.
So, the Babylon working was a revisiting of a working that had been done in 1918 by Aleister Crowley when he was in New York, and it's called the Amalantrah working. And this is a very complicated, but how I got onto this is that there's rumours from a supposed son of Aleister Crowley. And Aleister Crowley had a son in Newlyn, and that's all in my Zeno book. And I know I go to that house, and I've done all the research on the mother of Crowley's son. But he also had a rumor that there was he opened a portal from the Menantol, which is a fertility symbol, fertility site just up on the moors from me here, and that he'd opened a portal to Montauk. Now, I've actually done a sex magic ritual on that on the Menantol, and now I've got a 1-year-old child to show for it. So all I can say is that it does seem to work. So when he was in,
I hope he didn't come out like that.
Yeah. When he was in New York, this is a whole big scene as well. He did a work in where he summoned up Lamb, and this is his vision of Lamb, and this was in a gallery in Greenwich Village in 1918. Helen Blavatsky used it, for one of her books, The Voice of Science. So it was Crowley that really made the first image of what we now know as the Greys, and this is the archetype of the Grey aliens.
Wow! So was that? Did you say he drew that in the 20s, 1920s?
1918.
1918. Wow!
He did it originally in 1918. He was also in Camp Hero in Montauk. The Montauk project and the Philadelphia experiment, there's many people believe, and I'm one of those, that these are all Crowley thelemic rituals. And I've got all the receipts on that. It's very complicated, but, the premise is that Crowley opened a portal in 1918 that allowed the Greys to come in. And the thing about Crowley's opening portals, he did this a lot, that you had to close the portal, and he opened it with an Enochian key. In order to close that portal, you had to reverse the Enochian magic. Otherwise, you'd open up an interdimensional, you'd fuck up the space-time continuum, and then things would come in. So the whole thing about Parsons and Hubbard messing around with these Crowley rituals is that when it all went wrong after the second Babylon working, Crowley washed his hands of them and said he didn't want anything more to do with them. They were a pair of louts. And effectively, the whole scene he'd set up, it all went seriously wrong. Just on while we're going back to the 1918 bit, if you go down to the next image of Lamb again. Lamb in Tibetan means pathway or gateway, and ironically, where I am now, I've done quite a lot of research into Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan black magic rituals and other occultism, and a lot of it links into what went on here, because the Dalai Lama has been trying to buy the cottage up on the Khan here that Crowley performed a black magic ritual in 1938, where he summoned up a reptilian, an 8-foot winged reptilian. So the fact that Lam relates to Tibet, also there's another whole dimension which which involves the Thule Society, the Vril Society, Edward Bulwer-Lytton. David Bowie was very much part of this as well. I mean, I could do another thing on David Bowie at some time if you like, because Bowie was part of the Crowley rituals.
Do you think he, just quickly, do you think Bowie faked his own death?
Yeah, totally.
Just checking.
I was with one of David Bowie's best friends on the day he died at the Chelsea Arts Club. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the film A Man Who Fell to Earth, Nicholas Roy, very good film, by the way. Bowie was involved with a lot of things. He was also a massive follower of Crowley, and when he was going through his time in the 70s, when he was taking a lot of heroin, he would only stay on the 33rd floor in hotels. He was performing rituals. He was obsessed with Himmler, Thule Society. He got involved in a lot of dark stuff. Also, he's talk about black cities, and in 1999 he was involved with a game called Omicron, ironically, which is one of the names of the for the fake, which we're not going to mention. And this game was where people are possessed by demons, and so that's a whole different story. But you can see here, that's the dollar bill on the right. So
I don't remember seeing that on the dollar bill.
Yeah, there's old dollar bills, and there's ways of scrunching it up.
Oh, right.
Also, people believe that that Twin Towers was a Crowley ritual, and I also believe that because one of Crowley's magic formulas is 1 + 1 = 2, which is a very simplified version, and it's to do with the bringing in the Eon of Horus. So we won't really go too much into that now, but
that's right.
The next image is when Margaret Cameron, after Parsons died, she became a very very successful artist, and she did this thing, with a woman with a serpent having sex with an alien. So the Babylon working in 1946 involved Marjorie Cameron and Jack Parsons bringing in what's called a moonchild. In order to do this, that they did practice a lot of sex rituals. As soon as they got married, they spent 11 days literally having sex permanently, and this was to do with bringing in the moonchild. And Aleister Crowley had written a book called Moonchild in 1917, which was only published in 1929. And effectively, the moonchild is where you have a baby on the astral plane, and this baby effectively becomes the whore of Babylon. So they would do rituals where they would play, I think it was Prokofiev and Rachmaninoff, and also there's various rituals that involve semen and blood, and it's about having a baby on the astral plane that might not be a physical entity, but will then come in at some future stage. Now, they performed all these rituals, and it didn't seem to work, although Marjorie Cameron did get pregnant, and she went away for a while. She left Parsons. He didn't have much luck with women, and later she claimed that she did have a baby on the astral plane, but Parsons was completely kept in the dark about this. So after the Babylon working, everything kind of fell apart, really. He lost his security clearance because of his, it's not public knowledge, it's because of his connection with Crowley, but clearly Crowley's one of those people who never really gets put in the frame for anything. They claimed that he was selling secrets, he was a communist, that he was involved with depravity. So he lost his security clearance, and then eventually, after they got all the information they wanted from him about, the jet propulsion work that he did, he kind of fell apart a bit mentally, and the drug taking its role, and they sacked him. And then he got a job in a gas station. So this brilliant rocket scientist is working in a gas station, and there was a connection with Howard Hughes as well. So he went to work with Howard Hughes for a while.
But who's Howard Hughes, Bob?
he was the billionaire who became a recluse, and famously he never cut his fingernails. And at that time in Southern California, there's a lot of really weird, eccentric people around. Most of them involved in the occult. So he worked for Howard Hughes for a while. But then he wanted to give it all up and go to Mexico and develop his develop Crowley. He actually thought he would take on Crowley's work. So he wrote a book called The Antichrist. He called himself the Antichrist. And when Betty and Ron Hubbard ran away with his boat and all his money, he asked Crowley for advice, and they summoned up a demon called Bartzabel, which was connected to Mars. And of course, the boats, sank, and the FBI got hold of Hubbard, but the money had all gone. So at that time, Marjorie Cameron was doing her own thing. She was going off, and he decided just to go to Mexico. So he was working in the gas station. He got a job doing fake blow-ups, for Hollywood films and explosions, things like that. And then suddenly he was in his lab one day, just about before he was about to go to Mexico, and there was an explosion in his lab. Apparently he mishandled some mercury. Now, someone from that background, who it's highly unlikely that they're going to make a fatal mistake like that. The explosion, half his face was blown off. FBI got him to hospital. Marjorie Cameron wasn't allowed to see him or identify the corpse. He was pronounced dead, and that was the end of it. So it was all rather tragic, really. And
how old was he, Bob?
He was. This was in 1952. He was born. He was only 37.
Wow.
This is the thing. 37, 38, and it really is an incredible story. And of course, Ron Hubbard went from strength to strength. He created Dianetics. Marjorie Cameron was convinced that he was murdered by the FBI. Because the thing about Parsons, he had a lot of information, and at that time the Cold War with Russia was going on, and he was also invited to go and work for Israel for the develop their rocket program. And at that time, I think people were suspicious of Israel because it is linked to possible communism. So the whole paranoia, he was either murdered or replaced, or Marjorie Cameron insisted that he was assassinated, and she then tried to connect with him on the astral plane. She would do blood ritual sacrifices in order to reconnect with him. She spent her life, following his. She declared herself the whore of Babylon. So these things always happened when Crowley got involved. This is one of many of Crowley's lodges or communes that he was running, and it always ended badly because the reason that he would say, or other people would say, is that they opened a portal which they couldn't contain, and this portal at that time, when between the two Babylon workings, that was the time when all these unidentified objects were found, flying over Washington, also in Scandinavia. The Roswell incident happened in 1951, the big one. So people believe that the UFO people, at that time, don't really know that this was due to them reopening a portal that Crowley had already opened in 1918. So when I told these UFO people about the Greys, and they all think the Greys are in the White House because Eisenhower employed them, and there's also the whole theory about the CIA back engineer the Greys that came in as Roswell, and now they're utilizing them for as artificial, humans, and they're mixed with humans to be hybrid. But this all happened in 1918, and the whole thing about the Thelemic belief system, Marjorie Cameron became a very interesting artist in the sense that she went to work for appear in films with Kenneth Anger. I don't know if people know about Kenneth Anger, but he believed, another one who believed he was the following on the work of Aleister Crowley. So Kenneth Anger was involved with Jimmy Page, with Mick Jagger. He made the film Lucifer Rising, which starred Marianne Faithfull. So the link between Crowley, between what happened here in the commune here, which was development of the commune in Switzerland before the First World War, Crowley's involvement, which led to the whole counterculture movement, is really the one that I'm mainly interested in, and it's how the whole counterculture movement is effectively based on black magic and Crowley's Thelemic principles to do with the Eon of Horus. So, I mean, it all sounds a very complicated story. When Marjorie Cameron, who I'm still researching, she died, and she had did a Thelemic ceremony in the Mojave Desert. I never got over the fact that they killed Parsons. And so that's it, really. Hubbard went from strength to strength and became, a very rich, a very powerful man. He also believed that he was the great beast, and he also believed that he was doing Crowley's work. Wow. So
there's a famous quote of L. Ron Hubbard's. I'm going to butcher it now, but it's something like, "You'll never get rich writing sci-fi. The only way to get really rich is start a religion."
Well, that's exactly right. And these religions, all these cults, Southern California's, of course, Charlie Manson was involved with the CIA. The whole thing about Laurel Canyon as well. I've been researching Laurel Canyon, and these are all cults, and a lot of these cults are based on the laws of thelema, which come from Crowley's research. So the other thing is that all these lodges had to pay 5% of all their memberships back to Crowley, and it's paid through a guy called Carl Germer, who was his business manager. So Crowley was really weird in the sense that he clearly was a black magic wizard, but he also had an eye for making a living. And even when he was here in the 30s in Cornwall, he was trying to sell his own semen, and it's called the elixir of life. And at that stage, he was like getting on a bit. He was in his 50s, 60s, but he was still pumping out his wrong word there, and selling it to people, to grateful punters.
Did he not die penniless, Crowley?
Yes, he did. He died in a nursing home. And what happens with the secret services is that once you've done your job, they kind of cut you off, really.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because you've been painting this picture of Crowley being a supreme string puller and being massively influential, and it just makes you think, well, who's pulling his strings? Who's running his game, if you like?
Well, there are. Having done a lot of research on Crowley, I know he's above most intelligence levels in terms of he's untouchable. He never really worked in his life. He just travelled around. He was in Berlin in the 30s. Hitler was terrified of him. Mussolini kicked him out of Sicily. I know a lot of people, quite apart from the rock and roll world, who are very influenced by Crowley. The Beatles, the Stones, Page, a lot of them, Ozzy Osborne. The whole counterculture thing. But it seems as though when they lose their power, they lose the power. So he was clearly possessed. And there are strong suspicions that his organisation, called the AA, not Alcoholics Anonymous, but this is Argentum. It's called the Order of the Silver Star, which he set up at the beginning of the century. This is to do with Sirius, and which is the Silver Star in the constellation of Phoenix. And from what I can gather, the Silver Star and the O.T.O were the reincarnation or the rehashing of Adam Weishaupt's Society for the Brotherhood of the Illuminati, which was constructed in 1776, which was Freemasonry. So clearly, when you talk about the Illuminati, Crowley was very high up in that, extremely high up in that, and a lot of the Illuminati, were using the rituals and the Enochian magic that Crowley had decoded.
Did I hear that? Just run that by me again. Were you saying that Crowley might have been Adam Weishaupt reincarnated?
No, when I say reincarnated, Crowley believed he was the reincarnation of a lot of people, including Edward Kelly, Genghis Khan, Yazid. I mean, to separate the mythology from the actual facts is very difficult. But when I said the reincarnation, it's the
reimagining.
The Illuminati was supposedly driven underground in 1776. The Bavarians, kicked them out, and they had to go underground. And when you look at things like, I've done work on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which was Gothic novel which represented the Illuminati spreading through Europe. It went underground for like probably a century, and then using various people like the Rothschilds, who developed the banking system and Freemasonry, they managed to infiltrate the West, and America effectively is a product of the Illuminati in the sense that it's based on, the Statue of Liberty was given by the French Freemasons. It's a representation of Lucifer. And the Illuminati all connects into Luciferian belief systems. So when the O.T.O was established again in Germany at the turn of the 19th century by called Theodor Roos, they decided that the 20th century, the Illuminati would run the program. And the fact that Crowley was, appointed head of the O.T.O in 1912 is phenomenal, really. He was also, head of the Silver Star. And it would seem that the Silver Star, the philosophy, the esoteric belief systems behind the Silver Star, which connects to the Sirius, which goes back to Egypt, was the basis of the Illuminati program.
It's kind of remarkable. There must have been something about the guy, Crowley, for him to have so much influence and to rise to the positions that he did. Whether that's some sort of possession or just incredible levels of charisma or what, I don't know. But there's something about him, isn't there?
Well, totally. I mean, I was very skeptical. Jokingly, I've got do what they will tattooed on my shoulders. I did it as a joke, really, because when I was up on the house here, the haunted cottage up there, where he did. This ritual where he summoned up the Draco reptilian horned creature. I thought it was all a bit of a joke. So, I was messing around with this, and I wrote the Zeno book, to piss a lot of people off, to people were saying, oh, Crowley was never here. Well, I tracked down all of Crowley's activities, and even to the extent where I go to the house now where his mistress, Pat Doherty, had his child Ataturk. I know people that knew Ataturk. So I've been tracking Crowley's life for a while. And also through people like Jimmy Page, through Jacob Bowie, having grown up in the counterculture, Kenneth Anger, the influence is phenomenal. Frieda von Richthofen, Catherine Mansfield, Gurdjieff, he was in all these worlds, Berlin in the 30s. And so clearly, there's something going on there that is non-human. Or non-linear. People talk about him making himself invisible, traveling in time, being able to decode Enochian magic, climbing K2 without oxygen, being a grandmaster at chess, inventing his own form of yoga. No normal man could do all these achievements in their lifetime. Also working for all the intelligence agencies. Ian Fleming asked him to debrief Rudolf Hess when Hess came over. He was running honey traps, just like Robert Maxwell was running honey traps, and of course all this stuff about what's going on now with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. This is Crowley. This is Crowley. This is out the Crowley textbook because of what he was doing in the 30s, and even now. Ghislaine's solicitor is my solicitor. So all that stuff with Virginia Roberts, I've known about the Epstein stuff for years. I've seen the list of people on the island. In fact, I've got a neighbour here, a well-known actress who I won't mention. When I looked at the list a few years ago, because I swapped
Judi Dench.
I swap information with other whistleblowers, and I was sent the list of Epsteins. And one of my, I won't say she's not a girlfriend, but she's a female friend of mine. Of course, she was on the island with someone else who I used to hang around with, and it was the guy that she was on the island with was married to Ivana Trump, who I knew at that time, who was Donald Trump's first wife. So how this all links up, it's absolutely incredible. And when you're in this world, you realise they're all into occultism.
Well, that's beautiful. We've just rocked up to an hour. We should, because how was the book and the film gone? Because I got one of your limited edition, what was it, a print run, 666, I believe, hardbacks. How's the book been going and the movie?
Well, the book sold out in about a month, which was great. You know, I didn't know whether it would attract a lot of interest, but it was quite scandalous, really, because I said things that people didn't want me to say. So I fell foul of the Virginia Woolf Society, who said, "Oh, you've mentioned all about Virginia Woolf's drug taking and hallucinogenics." I said, "Yeah, I've taken it all from her letters. You've gone in on about Lawrence's sex obsession. Well, the cottage down the lane here, you know, Frieda von Richthofen suggested he called it the phallus. You know, he was doing sex rituals up on the moors with John Middleton. I haven't made any of this up. You know, it's all in his letters. You know, it's just that people don't go into these areas because the official narrative is that this whole Bloomsbury set, you know, were a bit eccentric, but you know, what they were into was phenomenal. So the book sold out, and then I had a few legal challenges about stuff I'd said, and I ignored all those people, and I went to paperback. So I've now got a paperback edition.
Cool.
And that's selling. The film won a lot of awards, and I've taken it off now to, you know, from screenings, because I was just constantly going to screenings, doing Q&As, you know, supposed to go and pick up all these awards from the mayor of.
Oh, what a drag! Picking all these awards up, man.
Is in the NASDAQ. It was on all these weird film festivals. So I thought I've got to put an end to it. So I put an end to that project last year in order to start a new project.
Oh, what's this?
Planning on, I'm working with a documentary filmmaker, the same one as we did before, and it's St. Ives in the 60s. So that's another film, and I'm going to have a lot of comedy in it. But the book I'm going to do, I've decided, having done various talks and things like that, is that people are really interested in my childhood. So I'm going to write my autobiography, and of course it's called Be Lucky. So I'm going to start on that this week, and that's going to be all the books I want to write. I'm running out of time now. I'm 70, you know, so like I can't write a book about my great uncle who was in the freak shows, about the Rebel Not Taken stuff where we tried to overthrow the monarchy in 1685, about my Cassius King, where, you know, when I did 2 years at Saatchi, you know, all the people I've known, you know. So I decided to put it all in one book, and I'm going to try and write that out this year. And have that to go alongside, you know, the film. And then if I do more interviews and things like that, you know, I'll have a book, you know, to sell on the back of it, which is always good.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that sounds very exciting. And I want to learn more about your Nephilim granddad at some point, at a later date.
I mean, we whiz through stuff. It's very difficult in an hour because,
there's
you know,
only so much time.
There's so much intense information that it's almost easier to write it down because, you know, I can remember some of it, but we literally have done a kind of whiz through it. And that whole story with Parsons and Hubbard, I mean, I've been reading this, and I've got to stop myself from doing this research now because I get obsessed with it. So I'm researching Marjorie Cameron. I'm researching her relationship with Kenneth Anger, which is absolutely fascinating. And it's like this week I've got to put a stop to that, because otherwise it goes on forever. Yeah. And it leads into other spiders' webs.
Come out, you've got to pull yourself out of the rabbit hole, Bob, before you get lost.
It's great because I've got my fire going. I'm in my cottage now, which is Lady Chatley's cottage. I've got a whiskey on the go. And I come in here in the afternoon, you know, it's on the farm, and I think, I just like the fire. And I'm starting doing all this research. I'm making all these notes. I'm thinking, this is just unbelievable. You know, it's not as if it doesn't tie in with what's going on today. That's the thing. You know, I don't really talk about what's going on now, but this is where it all comes from.
Yeah, sound. Well, Bob, I think we should wrap it up there. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you again. And
always a pleasure, and anytime.
Yeah, let's do it again. Let's do it again further down the line. Links are in the show notes as ever. rebelnottaken.co.uk. You can follow Bob on Instagram at rebelnottaken. Pick up I was going to say the soft copy, the paperback, not the hard copy.
Well, you've got the hard copy, haven't you?
I got the hard copy, the collector's edition.
You've got the magic copy.
I have, yeah. Yeah, this has been great. Thanks a lot, Bob. Stay on the line for us for a minute while we play ourselves out and shut down the streams. And for those of you watching live, we'll be back in 10 minutes or so for part 2. All right.
Cheers, Bob. Bye.
Bye.